Hi, today I'd like to discuss part 5 of Anna Karenina. In these chapters, we discover that this is a novel about orphans, Anna, Oblonsky, Karenin, Vronsky, and Levin. They didn't grow up in happy families, and now they struggle with this as adults. Karenin and Oblonsky's families fell apart, and Anna and Vronsky cannot become a family. Dolly and Kitty grew up in loving environments, so Dolly tries to keep her family together despite her husband's behavior, and Kitty does her best to make Levin's life less miserable. If you like it when abstract ideas are compared to something more palpable, then you probably enjoyed this part. Levin's chapter starts with a wedding and ends with a death, and the news that he'll become a father. He has to confess to his sins before the wedding, and he says that he doubts everything. If you want to read something about faith and doubt, you could try Tolstoy's Confession. You'd be surprised by how normal he was, despite being this celebrated writer and influencer. He was so confused, but I think it's better to be confused and true to yourself than to never question anything. He was a pain in the neck for his family, though. I read somewhere that he was on the priest's side in the part about Levin's confession, and this surprised me a little bit. Levin is late to the ceremony because of his shirt, just like Tolstoy, by the way. He is not prepared for this whole marriage thing. I think that I was right in the previous part when I said that he bites more than he can chew. Levin feels like an idiot, just like many people on their wedding day. He seems as excited about it as Kitty. The ceremony itself is ridiculous, and it's filled with horror stories from the Bible. But thank God, no one is listening because they're too preoccupied with gossip. Dolly thinks that the wedding is the only triumphant moment for women. I hope not. I mean, she really deserves better, but it seems like she's used to her role. Just like Vronsky, Levin sees that his happiness after the wedding is different from what he expected. In fact, he's not happy at all. He's disappointed, though he wants to convince himself that he is happy. For someone in his 30s, he has very naive ideas about family life. Kitty was his ideal, and for some reason, he imagined that he would be working and doing his own thing, while she'd be there, waiting for him to come back, waiting to be loved. Surprised she's not a doll. At the same time, he wants her to have her own interests, as long as he remains her #1 priority. She doesn't feel guilty that she is inactive, because she is preparing to become the wife of her husband, the mistress of the house, and the mother of her children. I don't know why I was so triggered by this sentence, but this idea annoyed me so much in War and Peace as well. Apparently, this is the only thing that matters to most of Tolstoy's female characters. Somehow, when they become mothers, they lose their most interesting qualities and become like pieces of furniture. And if it isn't the only thing that matters to them, then Tolstoy punishes them. Other readers think that he's less moralizing. This is just my opinion. You might have noticed a contradiction in the text. Levin thinks that Kitty is both active and inactive. Her activities include taking care of the house, rearranging things and stuff. Maybe he wants her to have other activities, to be more poetic, like she was before the wedding. Tolstoy described Anna's fall, her first time with Vronsky, but when talking about Levin's honeymoon, he only mentions that it was humiliating. Was it that bad that both the husband and the wife want to forget it? Well, I don't want to go into detail about this, but this is what Sophia Tolstoya, Tolstoy's wife, wrote in her diary, I believe, a year after their wedding. The physical side of love is very important for him. It's terrible. For me, it's quite the opposite. It's open to interpretation. During their first fight, Levin felt like a man who, having suddenly received a violent blow from behind, turns with vexation and a desire for revenge to find out who did it, and realizes that he has accidentally struck himself, that there is no one to be angry with, and he must endure and ease the pain. He doesn't even have the right to be mad at Kitty, because they're one now. Whereas before the wedding, he wanted to give up his freedom. Now he wants to assert his male independence. Tolstoy's writing is so funny in these chapters because he himself went through this in the first months of his marriage. At least I hope that the most ridiculous parts were intentional. Levin receives 2 letters, just like Karenine did in part 4. One of them is expected, it's from Dolly, and the other one is from his brother's partner saying that he's dying. Unfortunately, unlike Anna, he actually dies. Kitty is concerned with the details, which annoyed Levin during their honeymoon, is very helpful to his brother. Apparently, her experience at the German spa wasn't in vain. Levin isn't ready for his brother's death. Despite reading philosophy and overthinking things, he realizes that he knows nothing about death, and he envies Nikolai because he has access to this knowledge. This is the only chapter with a title in the entire novel, and it might have been the most important one for Tolstoy because it was inspired by the death of his own brother. If you like this scene, you should definitely read The Death of Ivan Ilyich. You can also find something similar in War and Peace as well. One of Tolstoy's greatest talents is the ability to make you feel like you're experiencing things for real. I remember being in a history class and the teacher was talking about Napoleon and mentioned a treatise that was described in War and Peace. So I had this impulse to say, I was there. Then it hit me. Something similar happened with this chapter. I've never seen anyone die, but the experience was so familiar. I could relate to Nikolai and to the people who had to take care of him, to their frustration with him combined with their grief. And Tolstoy took his time as well. Some readers might have been inclined to say, oh, die already. Sounds horrible, but it's not like we magically become more patient in moments like this. Every time Levin wants to leave, his brother asks him to stay. And instead of dying, he hurts the people who take care of him. It becomes a show. Even when the priest says he's dead, he refuses to die and says, not quite. It's so funny and tragic at the same time, and no one can do anything about it. On the one hand, most people would like to die surrounded by their loved ones. But on the other hand, death can be late to the party, and then you'll be stuck in this limbo. The alternative would be to die alone. These chapters were challenging, but I think they were my favorite ones in this part. Death is inevitable, and I don't think most people have the strength to be loving and compassionate and wise when it comes to it. What if you're tired and irritable and you hate yourself and everyone else? What then? I don't know. It really touched me. Now let's move on to Anna's chapters where we have other frustrations to deal with. In Italy, she tries to avoid thinking about Karenine. They were both drowning and her only way out was to save herself and to let him die. Now she's afraid that Vronsky doesn't love her anymore, and this turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. She becomes more clingy and annoying, and they fight more often, and he has to look for satisfaction elsewhere. He's not as happy as he thought he would be with Anna. Something is missing from his life, and that something might be art. He paints because he's bored. His art is just as fake as Madame Stahl's philanthropy. He cannot create, he can only imitate what others have done. The artist Mikhailov paints because he wants to unveil something special about the subject. This veil was mentioned several times in the novel. The first one was in part 1, when Levin was thinking about the Sherbatskys, the female side of the family, who seemed to be covered by a mysterious poetic veil. The second time was in part 2 when Vronsky was telling Betsy the funny story where he had to play the diplomat. He said that the 2 officers saw only red lips under a short veil and beautiful little feet. In part 3, when Anna shows Vronsky Karenine's letter, again the veil is mentioned. And in part 5, Serozha thinks that the woman in the lilac veil is his mother, but she isn't. When Anna actually comes to see him, she is indeed in a veil. So in his novel, Tolstoy does exactly what the artist is trying to do. Garnichev says that Mikhailov has the same attitude towards Christ as the new school. The members of the school try to portray a more human-like Christ in a more realistic way. Later, Tolstoy will express similar views about the Bible. He will leave only the moral aspects and reject all the miracles. Kramskoy was one of the members of this new school, and Tolstoy thought that his painting Christ in the Desert was hauntingly beautiful. The artist wanted to show Jesus as a human being, someone who suffered a lot and who had to make a choice. Some critics thought that he was too human, which says a lot about their perception of humanity. In 1873, Kramskoy was working on Tolstoy's portrait, and they met almost every day for about a month. Their conversations about art inspired Tolstoy to include the artist in the novel. Mikhailov says that he can't paint Christ as a divine figure because he's not a part of his soul. So he can paint something only if he perceives it as a part of himself. Unlike Vronsky, Mikhailov takes his craft seriously. He hates it when people talk about technique, and he doesn't recycle the existing styles. In these chapters, Tolstoy tries to emphasize the difference between true art and dilettantism. His process is full of self-doubt, but he doesn't give up in the face of difficulties. While Vronsky pretends to be an artist only for a little bit and then gives up his role as soon as he encounters the first challenge. The artist takes somebody's innermost traits and reveals them in his work. His main talent is to see what the rest of the world doesn't see, to reinterpret the subject in his own way. This is Mikhailov's approach, while Vronsky is satisfied when he sees that his work resembles the ones of great artists. Mikhailov gives his guests the opportunity to judge him, so this scene mirrors the one in the picture. When he looks at his painting with an indifferent eye, he can see all its imperfections. He can see that there's nothing new about it. He can do it thanks to his guests in a way. Perhaps you've experienced this even when it doesn't come to your own work. For example, when you're watching one of your favorite movies with someone and you can see all the things that they're likely to criticize. Of course, people try to be polite and sugarcoat it, but you can feel it, you know? Let's see how the guests react to the painting. Vronsky is concerned only with the technique. Anna thinks that Christ's expression is astonishing and that he pities Pilate. Golenishev sees Pilate as a kind, nice fellow, but a functionary to the bottom of his soul, who knows not what he does. The description matches the way Oblonsky tends to describe people. He tells Levin that Vronsky is a nice fellow, then Vronsky that Levin is, then Anna that Vronsky is. Really interesting when you place Pilate in this group. Just like Pilate, they don't know what they're doing, they're all nice, they all have good intentions, but because they're so ignorant, they can do bad things with these good intentions. When the guests leave, Mikhailov can look at his work through his own eyes and recognize its perfection. Why doesn't Vronsky finish Anna's portrait? Mikhailov can see what's so special about the real Anna, and he makes this trait more visible in her portrait. It's the first time Vronsky sees this trait. He can see it only thanks to the artist, and now his work becomes unnecessary. In this part, we discover why Karenine married Anna, that it wasn't out of love, that he was pressured by her aunt, and he acted like a gentleman. This contrasts with Vronsky's actions at the beginning of the novel. He made everyone believe that he would marry Kitty, and then he just left without even saying goodbye. Karenine has lost everything that was important for him, his status and his career opportunities. Everyone despises him for his goodness, for allowing Anna to do this to him. Lydia Ivanovna is his only friend at the moment, and although she's not the most likable character, she tries her best to protect Karenine and Serozha, so she refuses Anna's request to see her son. Karenine is honest with her. He doesn't try to hide his suffering. He says, "I'm broken, I'm destroyed, I'm no longer a human being." Unfortunately, Lydia Ivanovna is incompetent when it comes to practical matters, so Kornei, the valet, practically runs the household. This is the same man who told Anna she would die in childbirth in her dream. Surprisingly, Karenine feels shame and remorse for his past, though right now he has the aura of a saint. Serozha doesn't believe in death. And during his lesson with his father, we discover that he only remembers Enoch out of all the antediluvian patriarchs, that is, who came before the flood. The legend says that he entered heaven while he was alive, and it seems to be what Siroja is planning to do along with all the good people. He likes to learn things, but not from his teachers. And Tolstoy himself didn't like the idea of learning useless things just because he was told to. Siroja's dream comes true. He finally sees his mother. Anna says that she comes from Prince Karadumov to see Siroja. Why doesn't the English translation mention how funny this is? Because the name of the prince would be translated as think fast. And this is exactly what Anna is trying to do here. This is the only time this name is mentioned in the novel. When she is reunited with her son, she is alive. Her love for him is pure and unconditional. She doesn't need to pretend. She simply is. She bursts into tears like a child. In the previous part, Vronsky told her that she looked like a little boy because of her haircut. She finally sees what she sacrificed for her passion for Vronsky, and she already resents him for this. She assumes that he would never understand what she feels for her son. How many times does she repeat Siroja? What about the name of her daughter? And the last part I'd like to discuss is the theater scene. It's the second one in the novel, the first one being the conversation between Vronsky and Betsy about the funny story. Vronsky had to play the peacemaker just like Anna did in part 1 for Stiva and Dolly. Unlike her though, he didn't take this role too seriously. He had to play 2 roles at once. One of them, the peacemaker, was seen as more comical, and the other one, Anna's shadow, was taken more seriously. Even back then, we could see how different was the real Vronsky from the one he presented to the world. And the fact that this conversation took place in a theater reinforces this idea, this conflict that comes up again and again. When Vronsky asks Anna if she really wants to go to the opera, he uses the same tone with her as her husband. And when he is alone, he wonders why she puts him in such a position. He's just as angry with her as Karenina used to be when Anna left her husband so that she could be free and true to herself. Ironically, now when she is with Vronsky, she is even less honest with herself than she was before. When she returned from Moscow, she decided to spend less time with Lydia Ivanovna's circle and more time with Betsy Truskaya's, because it was more natural and she didn't have to pretend. But as we saw later, she did have to pretend. And lying became her second nature. Usually we refuse to see the pretense when we like it. When we're playing the game, we suspend our disbelief, so to speak. This is the same thing we do with fiction. Anna exchanged one dream for another. Whereas the previous one was a nightmare, this one is a little more pleasant. Doesn't make it real though. This scene at the theater sends us back to the horse races. Remember what Karenina said back then? There are 2 sides, the performers and the spectators. Back then, Vronsky was a performer and Anna was a spectator. Now it's vice versa. Everyone is looking at Anna and Vronsky is part of the audience. The roles can change in an instant, just like they did in the previous part when Anna asked for Karenina's forgiveness. Both Vronsky and Anna are playing this game, even though it seems like they're observing it from the outside. This scene also mirrors Kitty's wedding. Here's her description. Her hair, dressed high under the long white veil and white flowers. At her high, stiff, fluted collar, which in an especially maidenly way, covered her long neck at the sides and left it open in front. And later, Tolstoy mentions that her gown is from Paris. And this is Anna's description. Anna was already dressed in a light-colored gown of silk and velvet, with a low-cut neck that had been made for her in Paris, and had costly white lace on her head. Just like Kitty, Anna is dressed like an angel, and everyone is scrutinizing her. By going to the theater, she gives the high society of St. Petersburg the opportunity to insult her. She causes a scandal. When she is alone with Vronsky, she tells him that she hates him for his calmness. And he has to reassure her that he really loves her, just as Kitty did for Levin when he was freaking out before the wedding. I'd love to talk about other details as well, but I think that's enough for today. If you're at this part, please share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye!